If you've ever felt overwhelmed by all the different tools marketed for quilters, you're in good company. But the truth is, you don't need all the things to start quilting. But as your skills and experience grow, thoughtful upgrades can improve accuracy, efficiency, and perhaps most importantly, how your hands, shoulders, and even your neck feel after a long work session. Hi, I'm Beth Ann. Let's start with the cutting basics, then sewing basics, and then finish up with a quick checklist for deciding when to spend money on that new tool. Now, some of these upgrades might surprise you with how affordable they really are, but they can still make a big difference. I also want you to know that this is not a sponsored video. I'm just sharing tools that I personally find helpful. Let's dive in. You will need a self-healing mat to protect your table, a long ruler, a rotary cutter, and finally, a good pair of scissors. I recommend buying a cutting mat that's at least 18 by 24 inches. 24 inches by 36 inches is even better if you can snag a sale or a coupon. Larger than that is awesome, but not necessary. But something at least 24 inches across will make it a lot easier to cut long strips and larger pieces of fabric without a lot of folding. And here I have a quick cautionary note for you. Always double check the grid on your cutting mat to make sure it's accurate. This one is looking good. But even on an accurate mat, thick grid lines may throw you off if you're not sure which edge of that thick line to line your ruler up on. There will be a little more on rulers shortly, but first, let's take a quick detour to talk cutters since they work together. The 45mm cutter is the standard size for quilting. There are many different models and brands. This is just the one that I personally use most often. A good rotary cutter will give you clean, straight cuts through multiple layers without requiring excessive pressure. Here I'm opening up the strip to show that it's nice and straight, even where the folds were. Here's an ergonomic rotary cutter from Martelli. It comes in both right-hand and left-hand versions. Once you unlock the blade, it's designed specifically to keep your wrist in a neutral position, so if you notice fatigue or discomfort when you're rotary cutting, you might find a cutter like this helpful. A quick side note, I have a video all about the pros and cons of different rotary cutter styles and how to change blades. I'll include resource and product links in the description in case that's helpful. Now, back to business. There are many excellent rulers. Some have brighter markings, some have darker lines, and some include built-in non-slip grip. Be sure to choose one with measurement lines that you can clearly see against your fabric. A long ruler like this is incredibly versatile. You can cut yardage with just one fold for better accuracy, and the angled lines can help you cut triangles or bias cut strips precisely. Now let's talk about a few upgrades to consider and why. If you've ever had a ruler shift or slip mid-cut, you know how frustrating it is and will understand right away why something to keep your ruler from slipping is critical. It improves accuracy immediately because you aren't fighting the tool. Check out what happened at the top of this strip. It wiggled and now it's inaccurate. If you've ever struggled to get consistent strip widths, this might be why. The solution can be as simple as a weight on the end of the ruler, and thank you to Donna Jordan of Jordan Fabrics for this trick. Or we can look at other non-slip options. Many of us used to stick bits of sandpaper on the backs of our rulers to keep them from slipping and sliding. And while that idea worked pretty well, it wasn't always ideal. Now we have non-slip rulers that are much less likely to shift out of alignment. You can see the textured sections on the backs of each of these Creative Grids rulers. And by the way, at least one smaller ruler like this one is wonderful for subcutting strips into individual pieces or cutting odd angles like this. Next is a large square ruler. If you only have 3 rulers, this would be the third one I would get. I like one at least 12.5 inches square, as it gives me tons of versatility. A square ruler makes trimming blocks faster and helps guarantee your quilt corners are exactly 90 degrees. And if you need a smaller square for trimming, you can use masking tape to mark off the size you need. Here I'm using the large square ruler to trim these improvisational quilt blocks all to the same size. It works just great. And there we are. A second smaller mat that you can move around can be handy for trimming blocks or cutting complex shapes or curves. And if you want to get fancy about it, you can even get a rotating mat like this one. And as we just saw, an 18mm or 28mm cutter makes it easier to cut smooth curves. I especially like the contoured handles on my Fisker's 28mm cutter and this 18mm Clover model. And they're both comfortable for Connor, who's a lefty, and for me, a right-hander. While we're talking about cutting, let's take a quick look at a few specialty tools that may not be must-haves, but you might find them super helpful, depending on your work style and the type of quilts you like to make. Old 45mm blades can be recycled by using a tool like this. Instead of reaching for scissors repeatedly, you just swipe the threads across the blade. It's perfect when you've chain-pieced block components or binding strips like this. If you work in appliqué, a few specialty scissors can make your work more precise. Pinking shears can help reduce bulk along curved edges without a ton of clipping, and fine, sharp scissors with serrated edges allow for crisp trimming without chewing the fabric. But if appliqué isn't your thing, you can absolutely skip these. On the other hand, while duckbill scissors are often marketed for appliqué, and aren't these iridescent scissors fun? A Tula pink, my friends. I actually use mine most often for safely trimming thread ends near the surface of a quilt. There's one, and here comes another. And there we go. Now to the sewing side. You'll need a machine. We'll discuss features another day. Quality cotton thread, pins that are nice and sharp, and an iron. There we go. And one more thing, a seam ripper. Let's stop for a sec and talk about the seam ripper. Seam rippers are not a sign of failure. They're a normal part of quilting. We all have to sew in reverse sometimes. Here's my favorite Clover ergonomic seam ripper. It feels nice and comfortable in my hand. You might need to try some different options to figure out which will be more comfortable for you. However, if you hate seam ripping because it leaves your fabric stretched out and wavy, my next tip could be a total game changer. For this trick, I like to sew with 2 different colored threads in my machine, such as white in the top and a cream or light gray in the bobbin. Just enough different that I can tell at a glance which side is which after I've sewn the seam. Instead of pulling the 2 layers apart to get the thread, which can stretch or distort the fabric, try this. Working from the bobbin side, carefully snip the thread every 3 to 5 stitches, depending on how short or tight the stitches are. Once you get to the end, and I'm almost there we go, then flip it over to the top side and gently tug that top thread free. See that? It should come out in one smooth piece, and your fabric stays flat and happy. And here we go. Nice and flat. This method can not only save you time, it can make it easier to sew your fabrics back together again and to match up any intersections because the fabric isn't stretched out of shape. Now let's look at pins versus clips. Pins are a standard part of our sewing kits for a simple reason. They work. But when you're working with thick layers, binding, or bulky seams, especially if you've had some loss of sensation or dexterity in your hands, like I have, clips can be easier to manage. I even find them helpful on long seams like this. And you might notice that these are not the most expensive kind, so they're a little bit looser. They're tight enough to hold the fabric securely, but easier for me to just pull off when I'm ready to get them out of the way. You don't have to replace pins entirely. Sometimes they are the best choice for the job. It's more about having options. If you've ever had fabric try to wiggle at the end of one seam or beginning of another, you'll know why something other than your fingers can be helpful to control it. I really love my Clover silicone tipped stiletto. It's an upgrade that can really make the fabric behave. Now, when it comes to irons, I don't use anything fancy and I rarely use steam. But for pressing small pieces or applique with turned edges, as well as for Celtic style applique, I love my Clover mini iron. The small footprint makes it easier to see what I'm doing, and the lighter weight reduces strain on my neck and shoulder. So it's strictly optional, but definitely nice to have. And there we are. I want you to know that this is just skimming the surface of all the amazing quilting tools and notions out there that you might find helpful. So, how do you decide when and why to upgrade? For me, it's about quilting with more ease, less discomfort or strain, and more efficiency to make the most of the quilting time I have. I usually consider upgrading if a tool will noticeably improve my accuracy, save me significant time, help reduce physical strain on my body, or give me new creative options to help me try new things. If a tool doesn't do one or more of those things, I'm usually content with a basic version. And you don't need everything all at once. You can build over time. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. What's the first quilting tool that you upgraded that made a real difference to you? Your experience could help someone else. And if you enjoy practical step by step quilting tips like this, you might enjoy my weekly email list. I'll link that below too. Thanks so much for spending this time in the studio with me today, and happy quilting.